Thank you hugely. I feel an amazingly deep empathy, and I'm just aware that your flame burns ever stronger. So it's incredibly refreshing to hear that. And there were a number of doors that just opened in front of me that are routes that, in the separation of time, I don't know and wish to pursue now. But anyway, I think if we could just open it to the floor.
I'd like to ask a bit more about desire. How is it expressed? So the way you talk about it, in the Greek or the Roman architecture, there was an established language of architecture. So the emotion can happen in an established language without having to think about it. It's
Yes.
how I understood what you were saying. But now there is no established language in architecture. How does that affect, that now that anything goes,
Yeah.
how does that affect desire?
The way I take it in Built Upon Love, as I tried to say a little bit before, is by understanding desire as an aspect of love. Mm-hmm. I guess if you from a Buddhist perspective, it's interesting to understand this, and also I think that phenomenology, some thinking in phenomenology shares something with Buddhism in this. The desire is central to the human experience, and the problem that we often have is that we don't realize that what life is about is truly a desire for desire. That it's not it's not something that will be quenched and finished. And so our striving, and this is something that, like I said, is very clear in Buddhism, sometimes makes us very unhappy, right? Because we don't realize that regardless of how much we have, we will always be desireful. I think that so this aspect is always behind. I mean, I'm always very aware of this. I have great affection for this Eastern way of understanding the problem. So that the issue is to cultivate it, because that's the nature of human life, rather than deny it, but without being enslaved by it. And I think one of the questions that opens up in classical antiquity is the identification of desire as a kind of space that opens up between humans and the world in general. So that, for example, the first, there's a beautiful book by Anne Carson called Eros the Bittersweet. She's a wonderful poet, but also a classicist, where she speaks about the naming of Eros as basically the naming of this distance. It's also something that other philosophers have talked about. This distance that we identify with philosophy and with the work of art. You know, that we participate, but at a distance. I think this condition, characterizes our condition. I guess that would be my short answer. So that's how I see the concept being interesting today. The problem, I think, the crucial problem, I think, is technology tends to think of this issue as one of gratification, as one of closing desire, and it's manifested, I think, very clearly from the beginnings of functionalist thinking in architecture, when someone like Durand can basically flatten the question of architectural meaning to the question of the satisfaction of a need. He says architecture don't have to be concerned with meaning anymore. They just have to solve the problem so that the desires are satisfied. if you think about it, this is really the way that technology treats us, right? I mean, we consume, and then of course we're never satisfied. We go, we shop, we're never satisfied. But this is really kind of a perversion of. Well, it's really I would say it's a problematic understanding that technological means commercialism uses in order to proliferate, while we always remain frustrated. Right? I mean, we can have the iPhone 6, and then we'll need the 7, and and this is so. The Greeks were very clever with this. They really understood that the question of the meaning of an artifact, the meaning of a piece of poetry, really had to do with its capacity to make clear the space of desire as something which has to be valorized, but also given with limits, so that the issue is not simply to close the gap. So I find this really. I think traditional architecture really understood that. It's not about fulfilling needs; it's about cultivating this condition and negotiating it, because that's really the space of human life. Somewhere, Merleau-Ponty says it's like desire for desire. I don't know if that's that's more or less what I can say off the top of my head. It's.
That's fascinating. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question. I wonder if we could elaborate a little bit on the question of what beauty might mean in contemporary architecture. I find that a difficult idea. I mean, we all agree, I think, that architecture needs to have beauty and justice, combined. But what can we say we mean by beauty in the modern period? So traditional art and architecture, music, have been beautiful as a kind of representation of heaven, I suppose, Baroque cantatas and so on. But in contemporary art, in modern art in the 20th century, you don't get that anymore.
Yes.
Art begins to represent the more troubling aspects that the angst and the ugliness of modern experience.
Yes, I know.
And so architecture, what should it represent? So when I was a student, we were taught that architecture should somehow mitigate stress, that what you design should make living conditions better for people.
Yes.
And yet there are people like, for example, Daniel Libeskind, I suppose, would argue that it's perfectly valid for architecture to make you experience stress. I'm thinking in particular of that museum, the museum in Manchester, the War Museum, which tries to make you experience something of the anguish of war experience, and that's a perfectly valid thing for architecture to try to do. So I think it's difficult to know what we mean by beauty. There's a kind of cathartic experience. And I suppose my hunch would be that it has to do with contributing something to the public realm, to the sort of civitas, which is the most important thing that we have, I suppose.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it looks like, but what it contributes to that.
Yes. No, this is obviously a hugely difficult question, Dagmar. I mean, I completely understand. I mean, other than the kind of philosophical discussion that one can follow through Gadamer, I mean, the one recent thing that I have started to consider, and particularly in this new book, try to explore a little bit more, is whether it's this question of the attunement of an environment for a situation, right? That would lead to a kind of psychosomatic health, one could say. Yeah? Reading what I do here, I mean, this is something that, in passing, because unfortunately I didn't see enough of Dalibor, But at one point, he's the one who mentioned this to me. He said, you should take a look at Leo Spitzer's, I was forgetting the name of this yesterday, we were talking about this, Prolegomena to the idea of Stimmung. This man, this is a German, some of you may know this, it's a fantastic book. It's he's a linguist. He looks at Stimmung, which of course is atmosphere. It's a kind of attuned atmosphere, yes, which is, I think, where I would go with this, the conversation about beauty. But what he does beautifully, and which I found amazingly helpful, and which becomes the point of departure of this last book, of the attunement book, is he looks at the etymological roots of Stimmung in German, and he finds two how do you say this, linguistic roots, right? Two connections that go to Latin, well, Greek and Latin terms, having to do with temperance, to be temperate, temperature, like a temperate mixture, for example, for good concrete, and harmony. So it's incredibly revealing that two key terms in architectural theory that we all know about, because we've all read Palladio and Alberti and Vitruvius, they are actually the terms that lead to this romantic word in German that denotes the appropriate atmosphere. It's interesting because in the tradition, they tend towards the objective, right? Towards the mathematical, they connect to music, all this stuff we know about. Whereas in modernity, we think of atmosphere as something like the production of an effect, subjective, like difficult to grasp. So what I discovered just very easily, because I know more or less the tradition of architectural theory. I read all those books, and taking this cue from Spitzer, it's very easy to reconstruct the prehistory of the question of atmosphere. Going back to someone like Vitruvius, who in book 1, the first thing he says, and it's kind of baffling to someone that doesn't read Vitruvius properly, he goes, he talks about the education of the architect and all these things, and then he talks about soliditas, fimitas, venustas, and the fact that architects, do ichnographia, orthographia, and then suddenly he jumps to the city. And then students get completely freaked out because they don't know why. Why would Vitruvius jump? It leads like completely disorder, right? Why doesn't he talk about the house or something, or something more simple? He goes to the city. And so the argument that Vitruvius is making, basically, is that through the use of the gnomon, the architect has to make sure that the city is temperate, is good for human life. It's a question of, through the orientations of this that given by a sundial, you find where is north, west, east, and whatever, and you orient your city properly so that you get the right winds. Things that are kind of straightforward, but really have to do with psychosomatic well-being. Right? And that's really the foundation of good architecture. So if you read the tradition of architectural treatises that way, then beauty, this question of harmony, is really easy to connect, if you like, to this it's more medical, right? This idea of a psychosomatic well-being that is the result of properly attuned environments to particular human actions that affect you really in two modes. One, which one could say is pre-reflective, if you use this phenomenological or neurobiological reflection, and another one that is reflective and poetic. And so one can then understand, the complexity of this problem of beauty, but also one can also maybe get a grasp of what really matters. It's really this question of the shared experience of attuned environment for a certain purpose. So indeed, if the purpose is the exhibit of the experience of war, you could say that it's fine. But this is a very particular program, right? So I think that's how I would answer. If you think about it in terms of the temporal or event nature of architectural meaning, I think one may be able to wrap one's mind around this problem. It's not because I don't think it's formal, I don't know that, this is better than that, or... Yeah.
I have a question that hasn't really developed any further today than it did yesterday. And I said my question was really about the thickness of time.
Yeah.
And some buildings we looked at yesterday were quite new, some in the process of construction, some 100 years old, some 400 or 500 years old. We don't know what will last and what won't. We can't predict the future. I think that's why we like desire, because it suggests that there is a future, and it may be better than what we have, or we may have something we don't have now. But the question I have is really in terms of the temporality of the city. The buildings are like touchstones. We put them down and they affect the whole world around them, the environment around them, the way that things happen on the ground plane on many other levels. They affect the other buildings that go up around them, and then they change, and those affect other things and other things don't.
Yeah.
So my question is really, should we be cautious or should we be bold?
I think we should be very cautious with the habits of the cultures that constitute the ground of what we're doing. I think it's more about, to me, this question of if I construct from this question of the situation, what is very important, and it's something that Merleau-Ponty talks about a lot, is how the pre-reflective dimension goes through gesture and becomes habit. Habits are real. We have habits, they become maybe less obvious because of the pluralism of contemporary megalopolis like London. But there are habits. Habits are important. They are sedimented thought. They are, this pre-reflective consciousness is constructed of habits. I think we have to be careful with that which is habitual. I don't think that this necessarily unfolds into, like, you have to be careful with old stones or not careful at all with new construction. But habits are precious. And so we cannot just, make buildings that have inclined planes because we like, there's something about the habit that constructs an action that becomes an institution. That's what I think is maybe most important. Beyond that, the question of the temporality or the thickness of experience is something, of course, that comes from phenomenology, and that now, curiously, Merleau-Ponty didn't even suspect this. But I'll try to explain very simply. Merleau-Ponty thought that when he was speaking about the pre-reflective, he really had to second guess, because he really thought that somehow what is present is already past. So this idea of the pre-reflective is, of course, he understood Husserl and this question of protension, and Husserl imagined that the present moment had a thickness. That this moment we are now living has an immediate past and an immediate future, and then immediate past and immediate future. And that this structure of temporal experience is permanent. So that the present is not a point, like you would understand it by looking at the clock, that doesn't exist. A lot of us would imagine that the present really is a point that doesn't exist. What is very interesting is that these neuroscientists now have really demonstrated through MRI machines, God knows, I don't know, that the real present experience of humans is really a loop, and that in fact it really has a permanent thick structure that is not just one point. This is important because the main argument of deconstruction that was big, as you know, some years ago, but it's still around in a kind of like an unconscious level. People can digest this stuff and still take it for granted. Is that we cannot speak about the presence of the work of art because it's a fabrication. This is something that, and so this idea that our human lives are deployed in this kind of temporality is crucial to understand how architecture affects us. Because architecture affects us as we live in it, and architecture also affects us in a different dimension as a poetic encounter, right? When we feel a kind of incredible quiet, for example, in a space that someone has designed, and we feel this is profoundly important because it has revealed something to us. So this condition of the temporality that architecture enacts, right? Really, understanding this dimensionality is a fundamental problem. And anyhow, I cannot go in great detail, but that's something that I really try to unpack a little bit more in this new book, because I think this is one of the misunderstandings. You know, when one thinks about architecture as an aesthetic object, even when we do it with a very good intention, we often fail to understand how it really affects us as we live in it. Because we think that when we live in it, we're not really, there's nothing there, because the time is gone, but it's not that simple. And this is, of course, something that is very clear. Husserl always talks about this, gives the example of music. Yes, this question of the temporal wholeness of the gestalt, of the musical piece, right? That you don't, you're hearing a note, but you're hearing the whole. Yeah, so it's very simple when you think about music. It's less simple when you think about architecture. So that's this question of attunement, I think, has to be understood in this. So for me, that's where when I talk about the thickness of temporality, this is what I mean. So in other words, it doesn't matter if something is built like an ephemeral structure, like Palladio's design for Venice, or like a ceremonial entrance that lasted 3 days. This is as much work of architecture as something that lasts for 500 years. It really, if it changes somebody's life, and this temporary event really did change people's lives. So I think it's a challenge for us to think that architecture is more than just the stone and the concrete. But I may be getting into a very difficult territory.
Okay, there's lots of little questions, but really, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind being here. It's so nice to see you.
Much better than any of us could have said. So that was very grateful.
No, don't say that. I am very embarrassed, actually, repeating some of this stuff.
A funny problem. I'm very much with you on, among my little questions, incidentally, and we don't need to get into this, is in questions of desire or terrestrial versus celestial eros or something like that.
Yes.
Something like Bataille's economy of sacrifice in erotism as against, to my mind, much more playful erotics of the other surrealists, and certainly somebody like Dali.
Yes.
Which is just much more obsessive and fetishistic. Where, as it becomes an economy, it leaks off into the to use value versus exchange value, and people like Polanyi. And the idea of barter as concrete exchange is a kind of primitive language.
Yeah.
I.e. that economy looks much less like histograms on a screen and much more like, block topography, something like that. I mean, it has to be embodied. It's for Hayek's economy to work, it needs people. Once it starts getting emancipated to, pure exchange value,
Yeah.
the world's your oyster, and you know. Anyway, it just struck me as one of the ways of building out of that theme into the larger world of City. I think we went into the four temperaments business with Joseph somewhat, and I think that's an incredibly rich and under-cultivated territory. And what the early Romantics were doing with Naturphilosophie was very much trying to preserve that. And I think how that relates to what the Germans call Poesie has
Yes.
a lot that, you know, again, a lot to talk about. Very
Yes,
interesting.
yes, it's very rich. I agree.
But this business of language and architecture is an interesting one. Obviously, language of architecture is one of those cliches
Yes,
that makes
that's
you cross your
that's a
legs.
problem. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
no, but that's not what I mean, of course, right?
You just want to
Yeah.
sort of tie up your
Yeah, yeah,
trousers. And
yeah, yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. But Jan Assmann, writing on cultural memory, makes this really interesting observation about why Greco-Roman and Jewish history survived as a paradigm and Egyptian didn't, despite the fact that it was much, much older.
Uh-huh.
And his argument is that precisely because it was preserved as kind of a literature of the book, and it could therefore adapt itself to all sorts of different situations, what Egypt did was preserve it as the temple. And I think he's onto something, because I mean, he starts with Plato's comments in the Laws about how Egyptian art looks the same from 3000 BC to you know, even up to Hellenistic stuff.
Yes, yes.
And what those canons were about. They weren't simply about, you know, the kind of stuff that people derive from Palladio. They were about, you know, making sure that communication with the afterlife was still preserved.
Yes.
So on and so on and
Yes.
so forth.
Yes.
And it needed to be done. I mean, you know, there's these wonderful temples where the same hieroglyphs are mirrored around
Right.
the north and south sides
Yeah.
of the walls and things like this. And on the one hand, you're deeply enchanted by this spatial imagination, and yet haunted by his idea that all it can do is ossify, that it can't grow, it can't change, it can't be. I mean, the whole point of a tradition of this is it's constantly reinterpreted, i.e., it's not
Yes,
turned
yes,
into
yes.
a bunch of attributes that can be enforced by
Right.
gods. That it is, and that by making it spatial in this way, or by making it key to a ritual that itself became a kind of desperate way of maintaining continuity with its origins.
Yeah.
And when they were doing, you know, temples as late as Philae, they were going back to, you know, early pyramid texts to, you know, make sure they got it right. So there was this kind of anxiety about getting it right that is a bit like aesthetics
Yes.
in its own funny
Yes.
way.
It's very interesting, yeah. I've never thought about this, yes.
Well, I did, yeah. I mean, I only recently ran across it myself. I've got a PhD student who's been working on Akhenaten for 20 years.
What,
Anyway,
what,
we all know who this is.
who's the man you
Oh,
quoted?
it's interesting. Jan Assmann, Assmann, and it's called Cultural Memory and Early Civilizations.
Thank you.
But one last one, and maybe we can't. This is not the time to take this up. I'm intrigued by your debt to Vitruvius, because
Yes.
I think of him
As
as
a,
part of the Hellenistic period, from which you really begin to see technology for the first time.
yes,
mean-
I agree.
Okay, right.
I agree that
Yeah, yeah.
there is that too. There is
Whole
that too.
perspectivism of
There
it
is
and that
there is
system,
there is
yeah,
that
yeah.
too. There is
Yeah.
that too. No,
But
absolutely.
This is trying to transform architecture into a particular kind of knowledge.
Yes.
It's just so.
No, you are right.
Yeah.
You are right.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
No, but there are other things. There are other things there. I think.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. He's trying to make an architecture that embodies, situates us with respect to cosmic
Yes.
meanings, but he makes them so imminent
Yeah.
in the judgments. It's
Yes.
a very different kind of knowledge than the technites, and I think Linda's, what's her last name, Lundrum? Your PhD student. who wrote
Ah,
that
my
essay.
PhD student wrote it. Yeah, she was my student when she wrote on Dida. McEwen, Indra McEwen.
No, she's the one who wrote on architectonic.
Ah, Lian Chan.
Landrum?
Yeah, Lian.
Yeah.
Lian is his first name. Yes, Chan.
Yeah, I think she's definitely onto something, because certainly what you get out of Techne Poetike, out of the Nicomachean Ethics, is a style of making that's reconciled with the whole life of the polis. It's
Yes.
not
Yes.
about the objects
Yes.
in their own right.
Yes,
I mean, you would never get the Antikythera mechanism prior to the Hellenistic period.
you were right. Yeah. No, it's very good work she did. Yeah.
Yeah. I met her.
You met her.
At a conference.
That's nice. That's
Yeah,
nice.
I know, yeah.
She's clever. She's a nice guy. Nice woman. Lian Chang. Lian
No,
Chang.
London?
Lian. Lian Chang.
Oh, then maybe it's a different person.
You may be thinking about. I have a few people that have done work on classics.
The article.
It's getting
I'm
old.
thinking
Getting
of,
old.
You carry on.
Lisa Landrum.
Yes.
Lisa Landrum.
Yes.
Lisa Landrum did work on the theater, on the ancient theater. Yes, very
But
good.
she wrote an article on
Yes.
architecture. Maybe she
Yes.
did it from you.
No. I think she's been working on this. Yeah. But she worked on her PhD was on this question of the architect as a theatrical figure. It's precisely this
as
argument that I make.
architecton, yeah.
Yes, the
I mean,
architecton. Yeah.
The only way Aristotle uses it as
Yeah.
politics is the
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that we are going to run you so dry.
You're very
Nothing
kind.
left
It's
tomorrow.
been.
So
I'm very
let's-
grateful.
We have a drink for everyone, and so we can break into small.
Thank you very much for coming.
But I just think that I take away Dalrymple used to talk about our kind of position as he would have operating in the grey zone of modernity, which was, I think, an incredibly interesting phrase. But the struggle that I is a touchstone tonight. In some ways, this idea of the well-being of architectural space and how that can be achieved, as opposed to what I've realised tonight we're talking about, which is the kind of addiction of technology.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yes.
a very interesting set of poles to ponder on.
Thank you very
Have
much.
a- Thank
That's
you.
an interesting point, because what you were saying about, I think, for example, Derrida's essay on Levinus is really sharp. And I've begun to discover
He's-
stuff in...
Yes, his later work. He just wrote so much. This man.
Yeah,
His later work is
there's
much
definitely
better.
a problem there.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
This is somebody who writes very little, so yes, we could, between the two of us, get enough of this. But in the Gadamer Derrida debate, there were two big issues. One was to do with Nietzsche, which we don't need to worry about, because they were both going back to their Heideggerian origins.
Yeah.
The second one was that Gadamer accused Derrida of concentrating on the sign, whereas what he was concentrating on was the conversation. It doesn't matter who says it or what happens.
Yeah.
Happens
It's
between us.
it's really the.
It happens here.
It happens.
And that goes very well with what you were saying earlier
yeah.
about the degree to which our world, and Merleau-Ponty sticks to Husserlian terminology of perception of, rather than going over to the Heideggerian involvement with. It's like he can't bear Heidegger. So
Yeah, I know.
at any rate, but that precisely what you were talking about, how much of our world is, how much the reality. The AI people have only recently discovered that it's not about winning chess.
That's
or
right.
Go.
That's right.
It's about being able to recognize a friend or what the hell
Yeah.
is a table.
Yeah.
And so but that moment of where Gadamer talks about the thing happening in the dialogue, in the conversation, is very close to what you were saying earlier about how much of our world is not coming from,
Yeah. Yeah.
wet computer
That's right.
and radar.
That's right.
Yes, completely agree.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.